Ancestors came from a small village in northern Germany called Oldersum, which means old home. The village grew up around two small castles, first mentioned in the year 1381. Oldersum began as the home of a nobleman, and because of its proximity to the Ems River, it became a market town, a center of trade and commerce. In 1751, the population was 706, increasing to 990 in 1842. Today, there are about 2,000 inhabitants. From the early 1800s, Oldersum had a school, a doctor, pharmacy, midwife, trades, brick factories, and the shipping industry. Farming, dairying, and gardening provided the food. Of course, the church was the center of the village. It was a Roman Catholic church until the Reformation, when it became a Reformed congregation. The landscape is very similar to that of neighboring Holland. Much of Ostfriesland is flat and drained by canals. The areas along the river and coast are protected by dikes because this land is below sea level. The dikes have been in place for centuries. Maintenance of the dikes, canals, and pumps that pump the water into the river or ocean, and the locks that control the flow of water is a major task. From 1645 to 1970, Oldersum had a superintendent of locks. This was a very important post because if the locks and dikes did not hold back the water, there would be serious flooding. There was also a superintendent of drainage ditches, pumps, footpaths, bridges, and roads adjacent to the dikes or on the dikes. The first Hassebrook mentioned in Oldersum history is Caspar Hassebrook. From 1621 to 1624, he was the town magistrate. He was probably the grandfather of Anthony Hassebrook. Two other Hassebrooks are mentioned in Oldersum history. They are Johannes Hassebrook, who was the notary of Oldersum from 1642 to 1647, and a second Caspar Hassebrook and brother to our Anthony. This Caspar was a lieutenant in the local military company from 1690 to 1724. Caspar Anthony Hassebrook and his wife had three children, Giska, Jan, and David Caspars. David Caspars and his wife had two sons, Caspar Davids and Antony David. The next Hassebrook we learn about is Caspar Davids Hassebrook. He was a master blacksmith and senior member of the Guild of Smiths in 1828. He had been an apprentice and journeyman before he passed his master test. This meant that he probably worked and was an apprentice in a larger city. He and his wife had three sons, David, Willem, and Wilke. From 1807 to 1809, Caspar Davids Hassebrook was also the superintendent of canal pumps, bridges, and roads. He was succeeded by Frederik Sweers, whose daughter would marry Caspar's son, Willem, in 1825. Willem Auden Caspar Hassebrook is Frederik's father. His name is mentioned only once in Oldersum history. Shortly after he married, he and his wife, Eintje Frederik Sweers, rented the castle in Oldersum. Later they would make their home 2 miles west of Oldersum in a village called Peckham. 10 children would come from this marriage, and the family's occupation would be farming. This is a picture of the Hassebrook home just outside Oldersum, Germany. Most of the homes in this area are made of brick. Today the owner is Bruno Harms, a bachelor farmer. This is the front door. When asked why our family left their home for America, Hassebrooks still living in Germany remember hearing of one of the family in the mid-1800s who moved to the United States because they had lost all of their livestock to an illness. This was a bold move to follow their son, Frederik, as his parents must have been around 50 years of age when they made their journey to America. But let us return to our story. After an unusually hard winter, the first spring breeze off the coast of the North Sea was noticeable. The little ship, the Roland, a model of which is seen here, lay at the dock at Bremerhaven, ready to carry 8 East Friesens to the New World. Among them is Frederik Hassebrook, eldest son of Willem Autumn Caspar Hassebrook. He is only 19.5 years old and is traveling alone. The ship they board is small, only 110 feet long, and the journey will take 8 weeks, departing on March 21st, 1847. It is the 3rd of May when they reach New York. While the cost of this trip is unknown, we do know that in general people paid around $40 per person for the crossing. Departing must have been difficult, for each of them knew that they would never see their homeland again. The Roland was designed to be a cargo ship, not a passenger ship, so the passenger area was in the belly of the ship. In the course of the trip, the food was mostly spoiled, the drinking water stinking, the ventilation poor, and the sanitary arrangements even worse. For these reasons, seasickness and other severe illnesses were very common. Passengers had to remain below deck day after day during stormy weather. The stuffy air made it difficult to breathe, and too, as the ship's walls beat against the water, the walls of the ship and all its joints cracked. Whenever the ship lay on its side or was thrown deep into a wave, all of the passengers were gripped with fear. Letters from America had told these people of the wonderland they were about to see. Everyone could own land in this new world, even the common people. Their plan upon arrival in New York was to set out for St. Louis, but while on the ocean they changed their destination. On the ship they met a High German named George Mingle. This man had lived in America for 2 years. He returned to Germany to bring back his bride. Mingle advised the group to avoid St. Louis. It was not a desirable place to live. It was often polluted and humid. As a result, there were many sick with the fever. He suggested instead that they join him in locating northern Illinois. Northern Illinois had an excellent climate, and one could amount to something much sooner. Then he added, if you do not like it there, you can still make the journey to St. Louis. After much consideration, the little group embraced the far-reaching decision to follow his advice. Safely on land, the journey was not over. These families still had over 1,000 miles to travel. While arranging for the next part of their trip, people in New York City were calling them clumpers, referring, of course, to the sound their wooden shoes made as they walked the streets. From New York City, the trip went up the Hudson River to Albany on a riverboat. In Albany, the immigrants were packed into a canal boat. Canal boats were just open barges that were pulled through the water by a team of horses that followed the trail alongside a canal like the one seen here. Twice as many people were taken aboard than could find comfortable places, and there was no regard given to health or privacy. The canal boat would take them from Albany to Buffalo. In addition, the people had to prepare their own food. Usually the boat stopped at eating time, and all of the passengers had to climb the riverbank to make a fire and, if possible, to prepare something warm. Often they had nothing to cook or eat. Then Frederick Hassebrook and 2 other men from the group would beg for bread or potatoes from the scattered farms in the area. Having to beg for food was hard enough. Now realized that they spoke and understood no English. One time, Frederick was nearly left behind. While out begging for food, the trail he took led him astray, and on his way back disappeared. The captain of the boat, despite the anxious pleas of the East Friesans, gave the order to depart. By good fortune, Frederick was seen just as the boat was departing on the horizon. He had to run quite a foot race to catch up to his companions. Finally, in Buffalo, the wearisome travelers transferred to a little steamer. Traveling across Lake Erie, up Lake Huron, and down Lake Michigan, they landed at last in Chicago. Chicago at that time was only a little nest in comparison to today, but still it was the commercial center and market for farmers for hundreds of miles. Farmers came here to sell or exchange their product. Outside of the city boundaries, these farmers occupied a camp. Here the East Friesans could meet with drivers and wagons from their area, and for $10 to $12 they and their boxes of clothing, bedding, and tools would fill 2 empty wagons as they traveled the final 100 miles to Oregon, Illinois. This 4-day trip over magnificent prairies and wide streams renewed their hearts. Tired and shaken, the group was fortunate to find an empty house immediately, which would serve all 8 immigrants as home for a while. This area was mostly inhabited by Pennsylvania Dutch, but the northern Illinois had only been inhabited by white settlers for 15 years at this point. In looking for work, the group learned of some land in the area that was available for purchase. One of the group, Aarons, took a look at the land and decided to purchase it right away. The very next day, he signed for the land, and he bought 80 acres at $1.25 an acre. These 80 acres lie 2 miles south of German Valley. One of their neighbors plowed up 2 acres for them so that they could sow some of the field and garden seeds they had brought with them from Germany. In return, Aarons made his new neighbor a wheelbarrow. But what were they to eat before the harvest came? They had no money to purchase food. There was only one answer. Carrying a sack, they would walk as many as 8 miles to beg for potatoes from their neighbor. The news of these 8 East Friesens' successful arrival in the New World would be shared through letters with their family in Germany. By 1850, there would be 66 East Friesens living in this colony. Now, with the land purchased and their 2 acres planted as supplies for the coming winter, the next project was to build a home similar to this one. They would not have a comfortable brick home as they had known in Germany, but a simple log cabin with 1 room, 1 door, and a little window. They had to be well covered at night because, as it frequently happened in winter, the snow blew in, and by morning they found themselves covered with a light snow and exposed to an ice-cold breeze. As the colony grew in size, so did the desire to have their own church. At first they gathered in each other's homes for reed worship services. Later, they would use the home of Frederick Hassebrook's parents. Their home was chosen because it was close to the wagon track and had already been in use as a schoolhouse. Finally, on December 25, 1851, it was decided to build a church. Church records show Frederick Hassebrook among the 61 charter members. The church would be called Silver Creek Reformed Congregation of Germany Valley, Illinois. A preacher would be hired and a parsonage built. Unfortunately, in 1953, the church was destroyed by fire. In 1850 and again in 1852, cholera visited the colony. The first time, only a few cases were deadly, but the second time, it was an epidemic that took whole families. In Freeport, now a town of 3,000 residents, as many as 18 people died each day. Finally, in the fall, this Black Death disappeared. Some years later, a smallpox epidemic would spread among the settlement. Again, large numbers of children and adults would be carried to their grave. In April of 1857, a young girl of only 14 named Jelkalina Pummer and her widowed mother would make the journey from East Friesland to Illinois. 2 years later, on September 6, 1859, Jelkalina would marry Frederick Hassebrook. Frederick had lived alone for his first 12 years in America, and at the age of 31 he married Jelkalina, who was 16 years old. Frederick traveled to Freeport to obtain the necessary marriage license that you see here. I wonder if he stopped to listen to one of those now famous Lincoln-Douglas debates that was taking place in Fremont at this same time. During these first years together, Frederick and Jelkalina faced financial disaster. The Life Insurance and Trust Company of Cincinnati, Ohio, went bankrupt, and its loss of $5 million caused many other financial institutions to become entangled in general bankruptcy. Everywhere the factory stood still. Commerce and trade ceased. No one had any money, so cattle, butter, and eggs were sold for cut prices. For these first 2 years together, life was lean and difficult. They lived on a farm at Baileyville, Illinois, and later they moved the family on to Shannon, Illinois. Life would begin to get better as the demand for products increased with the start of the Civil War in 1861. Life for a pioneer farm wife included all kinds of work. While wearing self-made clothes and wooden shoes, she worked in the fields, fed the cattle, milked the cows, sheared the sheep, spun and dyed wool, and wove cloth to make clothing for her family. She baked and cooked, washed and wove, and in the evening read aloud out of the Bible, and on special occasions told her children stories of her homeland. By 1861, church records show Jelkalina Hassebrook to be among 8 people to form a new church, the Reformed Congregation of Forreston, Illinois. This is also the church where she and Frederick would be buried. Finally, life would get better. All the land would be cleared, and the crops would be plentiful. Next, a bigger home would replace the narrow log cabin. Beautiful windbreaks were planted to protect the home from the cold north and west winds. Fine horses were now seen in the fields instead of the slow oxen, and machines began to take the place of the hand workers. The Hassebrook family grew and grew. In total, they would have 13 children. One child, Martha, would die at age 2. By 1872, we find Frederick and Jelkalina Hassebrook living in Forreston Township of Ogle County. Adjoining their land is Frederick's brother Casper. Take a closer look at this map, and you will find several of Frederick's sisters also living here. In section 11 is Jana Hassebrook, who married S. Doyen. Down at the bottom of the map is Wimke Hassebrook, who married H. Reince, and right next to her is Gretchen Hassebrook, who married Conrad Cruz. Suddenly, on December 1st, 1882, Jelkalina Hassebrook would die of a heart attack. Her youngest child, Casper, was only 3 months old. A year and a half later, Frederick Hassebrook would also pass away. Both are buried in Forreston, Illinois, next to Martha. In 1887, the land would be sold for $8,190 and was divided among Frederick's and Jelkalina's children. The young children of this family were now orphans, and a young family they most certainly were. Casper was only 2 years old, David was 4, Fred was 6, Jelkalina 10, Alberta 12, Mary 14, and Fanny 16. They would move to George, Iowa to be raised by older members of their family. Beginning with our first descendant on American soil, Frederick Hassebrook, almost 150 years later, we have counted over 1,800 of his descendants on American soil. Who were these East Friesens? These determined pioneers, our ancestors, were obviously people of great perseverance, faith, and courage. They were best known as quiet, inward-looking people. They held their family and home life in high regard. They were famous for being reserved. It was said their decision-making involved considerable effort at building consensus. And East Friesens were not easily ordered into things they did not wish to do. For the most part, they were not the primary players or leaders of their community. Rather, they were the hard-working farmers whose interest and concern centered around being good Christians, good citizens, and good parents. These are the gifts that our ancestors have given to us. As we look to our past, hopefully we will develop a better understanding of who we are. And if we are wise, we will pass on to our children and grandchildren that same perseverance, faith, and courage. There are many people to thank for the material and research they shared with me. First, I must thank Pearl Hoffman of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, seen here with her husband, Bengt. Pearl is responsible for all the family research in Germany, the picture of the ship the Roland, and some of the pictures of Germany. Without her, I would have never even considered putting together this video. In addition to all her help, she gently guided me to others who would also make contributions to this video. Pastor Kenneth Dewall translated the book The East Friesens in America by Pastor George Schnecker, originally written in Germany in 1917. Most of the material used to describe our ancestors' trip to New York, their journey to Illinois, and the life as a pioneer was taken from this book. Thomas Glenn of Evanston, Illinois, shared his pictures of the Hassebrook house in Germany and some pictures of the surrounding area. Harriet Ackerman sent me her pictures of Germany from a trip she and her husband Hans had taken in 1983. I also want to thank my mom, Fanny Tisdall, seen here celebrating her 80th birthday with her younger brother, John Hassebrook. Mom searched for old pictures, helped to identify the different people in them, donated the background music, and encouraged me at every turn. In truth, she is really the one responsible for this video. Mom wanted to make the 50th Hassebrook reunion a very memorable one. I would also like to thank Bud Thaden and Louis Gilbert for sharing some of their old photos with me. The following is a collection of family pictures and other material that you might be interested in. 100 years after Frederick Hassebrook came to America, his descendants gathered for their first reunion. It was Sunday, September 7th, 1947, at Terrace Park in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The second reunion was held at McKinnon Park in Sioux Falls, the third in Laverne, Minnesota. It was at the third reunion in 1949 that Mary Ackerman donated a large crock and wooden paddle to be used for the lemonade. That crock and paddle have been used each year since. At the seventh reunion, it was decided that the gathering would be held the third Sunday in August each year. At the 30th reunion in 1976, it was decided that the next gathering would be held in George, Iowa, where the reunion has been held ever since. The reunions were held in a park until inclement weather forced the event indoors in 1980, and ever since then the reunion has been held indoors at the local Legion Hall, school, or community building. Generally, about 75 to 100 people attend each year's reunion, although at the 10th reunion, in 1956, 236 people attended. A potluck dinner, conversation, and reminiscing are the main features of the Hassebrook reunion. When the reunions were held in the park, family members participated in ball games or race-type contests. When the reunion moved indoors, family members were asked to share their talents, and several relatives are quite musically skilled. Family members are also asked to bring along old photos to share with others. A bulletin has been printed for each reunion. The bulletin lists who attended last year's reunion, highlights of the previous reunion and family births, marriages, and deaths that occurred during the last year. And a reunion committee is appointed at each year's gathering to plan the next event. The committee typically consists of 3 to 4 members representing the different branches of the family tree. Irene Harbour said, "For most of the reunion attendants, this will be the only time they'll see each other. Years ago, families would get together and visit. Nowadays, people are too busy doing other things. That's why reunions serve an important purpose. It's a chance for families to get together and reminisce, and we have found that as people get older, they are more likely to attend reunions as they seek to relate to their past."